Hi, everybody. It's Leslie again with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm here with Eric Spellmann, public speaker, and he gives us such great information on marketing, online commerce, everything you need to know to take your business to the next step. Today, the webinar is going to be on the most important web statistic, bounce rate. I want to remind everyone quickly that you can type your questions into the Q&A. No dumb questions unless it comes from me. He will pick those questions up and he will answer them throughout the entire webinar. The New Mexico Small Business Development Center also wants to encourage all New Mexico small businesses to be aware of the risks of cybersecurity risks that's out there and take advantage of our cybersecurity webinar features and webinars that we have on demand pre-recorded, especially from ransomware. I'll turn it over. Yes, you will be getting a copy of the slides. We sent an email out afterwards, and I will send you a link to our YouTube channel to watch any of Eric's webinars. So I will get that out to you right away.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Well, let's jump right into it. Put your thinking caps on. This one is going to have a few numbers in it, but numbers are important, people. We can't ignore that. You can't go, well, I'm not good with math, so maybe this isn't for me. Hush. You are a business owner. This is what you need to focus on. Your entire business is based on numbers. And if you don't watch your numbers, you won't have to anymore. So let's jump right into this. Why measure in the first place? I mean, a lot of you, and I'll just be honest. Yeah, I know I'm being all judgy right now, but a lot of you had a website built like a year ago or so, or 2 years ago, and you haven't even looked at it. It was an afterthought. It was like, check that off my list, website done. And it's out there. And you think of it as a pamphlet. You think of it as a glorified billboard. And you think it's just like this black box, which is going to generate business for you. It's not. And it's not a pamphlet either. It's not a billboard. Your website is not advertising per se. Your website is, if done correctly, either a lead or a sale generating machine. And if you're not getting weekly sales or weekly leads from your website, then I'll just be honest with you. You didn't build it right, or whoever built it didn't build it right. Like I said, your website should be generating a profit for you, either through leads or either through sales. So measuring is critically important. And that's why I always tell people, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. You need to embroider this on the wall, put it up in front of you, and never, ever, ever forget it. This applies not just to the website. This applies to everything you do. This applies to every business thing you do. Okay? It's all about numbers. Success or failure for a small business is all about numbers. And you can't use the excuse, well, I'm not good at numbers. Well, then you need to find someone who is, even if that's your accountant. But what I'm about to teach you are not hard numbers. You just need to know where to look in all the sea of numbers. The key to understanding web statistics is that basically you can learn everything about people except who they are. Now, what do I mean by that? When someone goes to your website for the very first time, and let's say they land on your homepage, okay? They leave a footprint. And then let's say they go to a secondary page on your site. Well, they leave a footprint there. And we know they went from the home page to whatever page they clicked on. And we can actually follow their entire path. And we can know how long they stayed on a page before they went. And we'll know what they clicked on or what they didn't click on. We can learn quite a bit. We can learn everything but exactly who they are. It's one of the most common problems people run into these days is they assume that you can actually know who, I mean, by name or phone number or address, something, you can know who is actually visiting your site. You cannot. When the World Wide Web was first set up, by Tim Berners-Lee back in the day, that was a big thing about anonymity. In other words, people would not go to your website if they knew you were going to get their name. I mean, think about it. Would you go to websites if you knew every website you went to was going to get all your personal information? No, no one would do that. So they built in this anonymous feature, and that's why websites get visited all the time by people. The only way, hear me now, the only way you are ever going to know exactly who is visiting your website is if you convince them to tell you. But that's another video altogether. Today we're going to be talking about the numbers, because you got to watch your traffic. You got to understand what's important. Web statistics also allow us to find flaws. So for instance, on my website, I was going through my web statistics like I do every week, and I discovered that one page was never getting visited. I mean, not one, zero people were, and all my other pages getting tons of visits. I can't figure out why. I'm thinking, is it just so unpopular? Is no one clicking on it? So I went and looked, and I quickly realized there was no way to get to it. I had not created a link to it from any other page on my site. It's what we call an orphan page. Okay. There's no way to get to it. So I found that flaw. And the second I fixed it, bam, all this traffic started flowing to it. I also discovered through web statistics that a lot of people were going to one of my pages, but they weren't spending very much time there. They were leaving. I mean, they were not doing anything. And so when I went and looked, the page really had nothing to do on it. It was kind of like a mistake, and somehow it had gotten linked. So web statistics can help you find those flaws, find those errors in your website. But it can also help you find opportunities as well. I remember one time I thought a very particular service that I offered was the most popular service that I had, and that everyone was probably going there. But when I looked at my web statistics, I discovered that the service that I really least talked about was the one getting the most traffic. In other words, more people were clicking on that and learning about that than what I thought. And so what I did was I remarketed that, made it a higher priority, adjusted the pricing, and started promoting it. And bam, I started making more money. People, I'm telling you, your web statistics are a treasure chest of information. You just have to know what some of the words mean. And I know some of you are going to just depend on your web designer and web host, but we'll get there. So how do you see these magical numbers? How do you see these stats? Well, one of the first things you can do is ask your web developer or your host. You know, the web developer or the webmaster, if you want to call them that, is the person who kind of updates your website for you. Now, maybe you update your own website, but the majority of people have someone else do it. The host is who actually hosts your website, like GoDaddy or HostGator or some of the others. And in either case, those people would know where your web statistics are, and they could hook you up with them. When they do give you access, and I hope they do, you're going to log into your web host dashboard. So the web host dashboard is kind of like a behind the scenes way of messing with your site. Most people never go there, but there is a way for you to log into it. And that's where a lot of web statistics are held. And a lot of web hosts have their own statistics on the website. Now, I'm not a fan of that, because in most cases, I'll be honest, web statistics are sent to you. In other words, your web developer or your host automatically send them to you. Now, people, listen up. If you're depending on your web designer to tell you if your website is working or not, what do you think they're going to say? You think they're going to say, oh, yeah, this website I built for you that you spent thousands of dollars on, yeah, it's not doing nothing for you. You think they're really going to say that? No. They're going to put so much spin on that. You're going to think everyone's going to your website. I'm not a fan of depending on a vendor for proof that the vendor's products are working. Did you hear me? You need a third party. You need an independent way for you to see if the statistics you're getting on your website are accurate. Because I'm here to tell you, there is no web developer or host out there who is going to totally tell you 100% straight truth as it relates to a website that they built for you. Okay, they're going to try to spin it in some way. I'm not saying they're all liars. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, if you need direct answer, hey, I spent this much money on my website, is it working? Well, you need third party. Okay. And so I'm not a big fan of depending on a vendor for that information. My favorite third party is Google Analytics. People, I'm here to tell you, Google Analytics is the way to go. It is the ultimate in statistics packages for your website. Now, it ain't the only one. It ain't the only one. There's a lot of them out there. But one of the reasons I like it a lot, it's free. It's totally free. Costs you nothing. You see, the way it works is you go to Google Analytics and you set up an account for your website. And under that account, it's going to give you some code. Once you kind of set it up, say, this is my www, and this is my email, then it's going to give you some code and say, this code, this little snippet of web code, and trust me, it'll look like gobbledygook. Okay. It'll look like code and you won't really understand it, but it's going to tell you to put that on every web page you have. Now, don't worry, it's not going to show if people go to your website. They're not even going to know it's there. But by the way, that's important that it not show. I remember back in the day, back when websites were first coming out, do y'all remember seeing like little odometer counters, like car odometers, but they were on a website and they basically told you how many visitors the website had? Oh my gosh, that's so stupid. Okay. And the reason it's stupid is because the people who had those on their website were basically showing everybody else how few people were visiting that site. Listen to me. The web statistics are your business and your business only. They are not something that you have to blast out to everybody, because then your competitors will see. No, you keep your web stats close to the vest. It is one of the most confidential and private things you need to have, because basically they're basically telling whoever sees them how your company is doing, how big your audience is, that kind of thing. So I like Google Analytics because it's totally free. I like Google Analytics because it's third party. In other words, I'm not depending on my web host or my web developer. Regardless of what they tell me, Google will tell me whether it's true or not. Google, all it's doing is counting things. And so it's going to give you that little piece of code, like I told you. And what you're going to do is install that. Either your web developer or your host or somebody, or even you, is going to install that on every single page of your site. Because every single page is going to generate different statistics. The question always arises, should my webmaster or web developer, should they charge me to do that? In my opinion, no. There should be no charge for that. I truly believe that Google Analytics should automatically be a part of every website, because it is the only way to truly trust that you're getting objective results. And so if your webmaster is charging you, it better not be a lot. Maybe a teeny tiny bit for the labor, but actually copying and pasting a little piece of code on every single page, not that big a deal. Now, once they get it installed, because remember, you've set up the account, not them. Once they get it installed, then you should start seeing numbers. But if they install it for you, okay, if they go to Google Analytics and set up an account for you, then you've got to make sure that they make you a user. And I'll be honest, they should make you an admin user, one of the highest users you can be on analytics, because they make different kinds of users for analytics. I mean, They make some where all they can do is look at certain parts, or they can run certain reports. There's different levels of users, but the admin, they can add users, they can remove users. And so only with an admin user can you do that. So I would ask that they make you an admin user for your Google Analytics if they set it up for you. And then once you're in there, start looking around. Google Analytics is pretty cool. And if you're already getting some traffic, you will start seeing real-time traffic show up. It's kind of fun. It's like an EKG, in a hospital, watching a heartbeat. You're seeing people come in, you see people leave. You're seeing how many active people are there right now. It's really cool. And you can, like I said, you can watch it and see what's going on. I'm going to be explaining a lot of that here in a minute. You can also change the date ranges. Once you get a little bit of history in there, like mine, I have years and years and years of statistics. I can go in there and say, you know what? I want to see what my web stats were from here to here, or there to there. And I want to compare it to the same time last year. I mean, you can do some amazing comparative reports using this. So what are the statistics to check? Okay. I'm going to explain what each one means so that you know what they are, because these are going to be the main ones that you run into. Now, Google Analytics has a lot of others in there, but these really are the main ones for you to focus on. First, I'm going to tell you one that's not. Hits. Do you remember back in the day, we would hear about a web stat called hits? How many hits are you getting? Your website got so many hits. It was all about hits. Well, hits are irrelevant, people. If someone starts bragging at you on how many hits their website gets, hang up on them, walk away from them, but hits are irrelevant. Let me explain why. Most people don't even know what a hit is. A hit, technically, is just one file transfer. A file was transferred from your website to a user looking at it. That's it. It's a file transfer. But what most people don't know is that most websites, and specifically most web pages, are made up of multiple files. That's right. Like your homepage, that one page, you got to realize every picture is a file. Every picture. So as an example, let's say that I had a giraffe website. It's all about giraffes. And one of my pages had 100 pictures of giraffes on it. For one person to view that one page, how many hits would that be? Well, if there were 100 pictures of giraffes, that's 100 files. And the web page itself counts as one. So when one person looks at that giraffe page once, that website has generated 101 hits. 100 for the pictures and 1 for the web page itself. Do you see how hits are irrelevant? All I have to do is put a ton of pictures on a page and I'm getting hits, like crazy. So I'm not a big fan of hits. In fact, it's a very misused term. Back in the day, we really heard a lot about it. We just got 200,000 hits this last month. Whoop-de-doo. Page views are more accurate. If you really have to look at one stat that kind of gives you a traffic, you want to know what your traffic is, page views are where it's at. In other words, how many actual pages were seen. It's not how many people, that's a totally different number, but it's how many pages were viewed, okay? And we call them page views. And regardless of how many files are in the page, if it got viewed once, that counts once. Now, if one person looks at the same page again and again and again, yeah, that counts. Not if they just keep hitting refresh all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. But if they come in every day and check a page, come in the next day, check a page, come in the next day, check a page, then yeah, those count. We're not counting people, we're counting page views. And one person may look at hundreds of pages on your website. Time on page is another good one. How long did someone stay on that page? Now this, like I said, is a very important one. if you have a monster page, and I hope you don't, like your homepage, maybe I mean, you're scrolling for days to get to the bottom of it. You got to look at the time on page for that page. Okay, I tell people all the time the most valuable real estate is at the top of every page, and the real estate gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and worthless and worthless and worthless as you scroll down, because most people give up once they go a certain amount. So I tell people all the time the most important information should always be at the top. The higher you are on the web page, the more people are going to see it because the fewer have given up. So look at the time on the page. So let's say that I had this monster page. Okay. If I see that the average time on that page is like 10 seconds, then I know people are overwhelmed with that page, that people are looking at that page going, oh my gosh, I don't have time to read all that. And they're leaving. The longer the time on page, typically that means the more interested they are in what's on the page. But if they click on a page and then within seconds, it looks like they're clicking and going somewhere else, that means they didn't find what they were looking for. They scanned it, they looked, and that's why you got a few seconds, but then they left. Time on site. This is another critical one, especially if you're selling something. What you really want is for people to spend a lot of time on your website. And that can actually be a goal. It's kind of one of the ways, one of the barometers on how popular your web content is. In other words, do people like what they're eating? Okay. I mean, think about it. You go to a restaurant, you don't like what you're eating, you leave early. But you go to a restaurant, you like what you're eating, you stay the whole time. What we want is a longer time on site. Also, larger websites with lots of pages that are interconnected will have a larger time on site. I tell web owners all the time, business owners, I say, you really need to up your time on site. In other words, write down that number and see if you can improve it. Now, how do you improve people staying on your website longer? The key is content. You could take better pictures. You could write better copy. You could organize it better so people can get where they want quicker. I'll be honest, the number one way, hear me, this is freebie. It's not on the page. Listen, the number one way is to make sure that all your content is written at a 5th grade level. And when I say content, I mean text. 5th grade level. You see, the 5th grade level is what we call conversational. The way I'm talking to you right now is at a 5th grade level. I'm not trying to impress you with big words. I'm just trying to communicate. So I use words that you will easily understand. Most humans speak at a 5th grade level, and that's fine because we're speaking to be understood immediately. People should be able to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of websites are written with the intent to impress. How many times you've been on a website and the language on it is just so college level, PhD level, it makes you feel stupid just trying to read it? No. Sadly, a lot of companies will put their own jargon on a website, big old words that the rest of us don't even care about. You need to dumb it down, not to where your company sounds simplistic or slow or something. What I'm saying is you need to use language that people can easily eat, okay, without having to chew a lot. You can also look at the most and least popular pages on your site. In other words, you can find out what page is being looked at the most. Now, some of you would say, well, Eric, isn't the home page the most viewed page on everyone's site? Nope. Heck, it isn't even the most popular page on my site. You got to realize everyone thinks of the home page as like the front door to a website. It's how everyone arrives at your house. But see, a home page, the metaphor doesn't really carry through like that, because a lot of people are going to come through the windows of that house. They're not going to go through the front door. They're going to come through the chimney. They're going to go through the windows. And before I beat that horse to death, you got to realize every single page on your website is looked at by Google. And so Google's not going to always send people straight to your homepage. Google's going to send them to the page it thinks is most relevant for what those people searched on. So if you have a big page on, say, Huffy bicycles, okay, then if someone does a search on Huffy bicycles, your page may show up. And if they click on it, where are they going to go? Are they going to go to your homepage? No, they're going to go straight to your Huffy bicycle page. And so you need to start looking, what is my most popular web page and what is my least popular? Now, what do you do with the least popular? Well, I'll just be honest with you once again. On most websites, the least popular page is the About Us page. I know, right? Everyone assumes, really? That's the credentialing page. That's where, that's where we learn about the company and have a real sense of stability. We get to learn about the owner. But guess what? Most people don't care because they're in a hurry to find the answer to a question, find the solution to a problem. They don't care who's going to have it. And in most cases, they don't care who's selling. So the About Us page. Now you're saying, well, does that mean we need to get rid of it? No. There are people who really depend on the About Us page. Won't be the majority of people, but the people who do, they won't do business with you unless they know that information. So I would leave that. Where this really comes into play is where you're talking about products. So let's say, to continue with the bicycle analogy, so you have one page on Huffy bicycles, another page on Schwinn bicycles, and another page on, I don't know, bicycle parts. Now, what do you think is going to be the most popular page of those three? Who knows? I'm not a bicycle person, but for the sake of argument, let's say it's the Schwinn page. So maybe the Schwinn page is the most popular. The least popular might be Huffy, and the middle most popular might be the bicycle parts. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that more people are looking for Schwinn bicycles than Huffy bicycles, and more people are looking for bicycle parts than are looking for Huffy bicycles. This is a great way of kind of getting a very raw, very rough view of your most popular services and products. Okay. And this is one of my favorites. You can follow the user path. That's right. In Google Analytics, which I'm about to show you, in Google Analytics, you can follow a user path. Now, the user path is basically, it shows how most people travel through your website. They may start on your homepage, but then what do they click on next? And then what do they click on? And then what do they click on? And you can actually follow the path. And what you will discover is that the majority of users are going to follow a very particular path from page to page. And what does that tell you? It tells you where the traffic is. Most people don't know which parts of their websites are the highways and which are the dirt roads. The majority of people are going to travel the way that, not necessarily the way you think, but based on how quickly they think they're going to find the answer. Okay, so understand user path, and I'll be showing you that too. But here it is. This is the most important statistic of all. And I have people all the time, they ask me, Eric, is there a web statistic that tells me if people like my website at all? Actually like it. Just a general, do they like my website? This is it. It's the bounce rate. The bounce rate, hear me out. The bounce rate is a percentage of people who land on a page and don't click on anything. They leave. They exit. They're gone. Many times it's the last page visited. They bounce off. Okay? What you're wanting is that on every page someone lands on, that they click and go further. People tell me all the time, or I tell people all the time, on your homepage, that's where you need to be looking at bounce rate the most. Because if they land on your homepage and can't find what they want to click on, your bounce rate will be high. Now remember, the word rate means percentage. So this is a percentage. So think of it as the percentage of people who land on a page and don't click on anything. They leave or hit the back button. Now, people ask me all the time, what should my bounce rate be? I tell them, you should shoot for 20% or below. In other words, you want 80% of the people to click on something and keep going deeper into your site. You really only want 20% or less to leave immediately. That's why it's the most important page. And I use this all the time to help discover whether, some pages are really good at converting people from anonymous to, real leads, through a contact form or something like that. And that's a good point. Most of you have a contact us form. What's the bounce rate on that page? In other words, how many people land on your contact us page and just leave? They never fill it out. The bounce rate will tell you. How many people land on a product page that you have and they never click add to shopping cart or buy? The bounce rate is that stat. So this is an example. What you're looking at here is an example of Google Analytics. I'm going to show you a few of these, and I know these are small, but you will be getting these in print to look at. Now, you can look at a variety of dates, and I've kind of blurred out who this is because really web stats are very, very confidential, okay? And of course, I'm not going to show you mine because I know my competitors are watching. So take a look. It can show you. Now, you'll notice down here, in fact, I'll get my little pointer. We have a thing called sessions, okay? A session is like one person looking at your website, regardless of how many pages they go through. And so you can see, we start down here, May 8th, May 15th. So it's like a week at a time here. And you can see the number of sessions that occurred on that day go up, and then they go down, and then up, and then down. You see, it's going to be like a little hill. Believe it or not, these can actually be tied to days of the week. Depending on what your business is, the weekends are usually not very high traffic, unless you're a tourist spot. But the majority of traffic, I'll be honest, on my website, always came on a Thursday. It did. I don't know why. To this day, I don't realize why. But I would always spike on Thursday on sessions. Okay. Also, whenever I would send out an email newsletter, I can look at my web statistic and I can always tell when a newsletter just went out because my traffic the next day would spike. And I mean spike really high, like 5 times the traffic I normally get. I'm a huge fan of email newsletters for that reason. Now down here is that we show that during this time period, and it looks like it was May 6th, 2016 through June 5th. So 1 month, they had 3,003 sessions, which means they had 3,003 people in single sessions. It doesn't mean unique people. Remember, the same person can come back over and over and over. So sessions is just a user experience, if you will. Now, the total number of users is right here, 2,578. So what that means is 2,578 different people had 3,003 sessions. And that tells me that some of these people came back. Now, in my opinion, not enough. Page views is the next one. Of these 2,578 people who did 3,003 sessions, they looked at a total of 3,817 pages. Which brings us to this number, pages per session, 1.27. Now, I'll be honest, in this little example I'm showing you, that is awful. I would be embarrassed at the average number of pages per session because that basically means they're not interested. More than half the people are leaving with only looking at one page. That's sad. That means they're not going deeper. You want that pages per session to be much higher. Now down below that, down here, we have average session duration. In other words, how long were they on your website? 1 minute 28. That's also embarrassing. I'm telling you, people, you really want that average duration to be as high as possible. And that's also a good barometer on whether you're doing good. How long did people hang out on your website on average? And so this means more than half the people did more than that. More than half the people spent less time. We'll take a look at the next stat, the bounce rate. And we're starting to understand why there's a problem here, aren't we? Their bounce rate is 79%. Now, before some of you start laughing and going, oh, they're terrible. Guess what? When you go look at your bounce rate, it might be worse than that. I'll be honest, the average bounce rate on websites that I go to that where they really haven't even thought much about it is like 90% or higher. 90% average bounce rate. Remember what I told you the goal was? 20% or less. Okay. We want the majority of people clicking on things. So then we have the percentage of new sessions. Now, what does it mean by new? Once you install Google Analytics, it kind of keeps up with people who return, like the same person who comes back. So like they visited once last month, they visited once this month. Now, once again, I can't tell you who it was or where they live, but I can tell you whether they came back or not. So in this case, it's saying that the percentage of new sessions is 84%. In other words, during that month, 84% of the people who landed on this page are brand new, never been here before, first-time visitors. You can look at that as a positive and a negative. It's positive because you're getting a lot of new users, but it can be a negative if you've built a website that depended on people coming back. Okay. And then, of course, you'll see a little pie graph over here showing that, with blue being the percentage of new and green being the return visitors. By the way, if you have any questions, please ask in the chat or in the Q&A. And okay. Now take a look at this next one. Now, on this next one, this is an interesting statistic because it actually shows remember the last page was kind of an overview for the whole site. We weren't looking at page by page by page. We were just looking at the whole site, the overview, if you will. But under audience, because your little dashboard is over here, under audience, we can see what devices they're using to look at your website. So in this particular case, there were 3,003 sessions. 2,270 sessions occurred on a desktop, 651 occurred on mobile, and 82 on a tablet. Believe it or not, you can actually break it down even further than that. And I can see, how many people were using an iPhone 12? How many people were using an Android this or a Google Pixel or an iPad? You can really get down to that level. And it's not just mobile like that. I mean, you could look at, people using a Microsoft Surface, if you will. So it kind of tells you what device they're using. Now, why is that even important, knowing what device they're using? Because what you're seeing is a quicker and quicker move to mobile. In fact, I'm kind of surprised by these statistics because the majority of people who come to your website, and what you will probably quickly learn in analytics, are mobile. They're looking at you on the mobile phone. Now, what this number can tell me also is that since it kind of bucks my trend that I told you about mobile usage, that perhaps the mobile website is awful. And so people look at it on a computer. It also tells you what percentage of new sessions were started on those devices. The new users, how many brand new users, what the bounce rate is using those devices, and the rest. You can divide it out. I'm telling you, you will never run out of numbers with Google Analytics. And if you understand statistics or take a minute to go through analytics or watch a few videos or heck, watch this video. You'll learn about the statistics that are the most important. Okay, take a look at this one. This one, it shows a kind of a different dashboard. And you're saying all of these look different, Eric. You're right. And that's because you can even set up your own dashboard for the most important statistics you want to track. And that's one of the things I love about Google Analytics. You can customize it to just show, like, on a, think of it as a management view, okay? The CEO view, where they kind of get the broad look. They only see, they don't have to sift through all the myriads and myriads of pages of information. They can look at the most important thing for them. Now, take a look at this one over here. These people decided that users by time of day were important to them. And basically what you're looking at right here is the darker the block, and it's a time, like this is saying on a Monday, say at 2 a.m. Okay. Monday at 2 a.m. was a very high amount of people visiting, which is kind of interesting. Because why do they have their highest traffic in the middle of the night? Makes you kind of wonder what kind of site it is. But this will show you where the most traffic is, broken down by time and broken down by day of the week. And I use that. I use that a lot. And you can see Saturday is pretty much dead for them. Their highest traffic happens on a Monday. And for whatever reason, early in the morning. Now, there's another thing that might explain it other than just people staying up late. And chances are this probably plays a big piece of it. Your overseas visitors, okay? When people visit you from overseas, it will show up as weird times. And so I like to always tell people, you want to know whether you're getting international visitors, you want to know if people overseas are interested in your product, you come here and take a look at that. Down here, you'll also see a little map, kind of showing you what countries people are coming from. India seems to be kind of one of the big ones other than the United States. Okay, this one I like a lot. This particular screen, and once again, it's under acquisition. Acquisition simply means where the traffic came from. In other words, when people landed on your website, where were they right before that? Where were they? So if you take a look right here at this little pie graph, it says blue is organic search. Now, organic search, think of it as Google, okay? Or it could, technically, it could be Bing as well. But organic search is what these search engines are kicking back to you based on them suggesting them to your customers. So for instance, if someone goes into Google and then do a search on Huffy bicycles, and Google serves you up as number one, then your organic search is going to be fairly high. Organic is natural. It's not paid. These people didn't pay to show up well in Google. These aren't ads. Google is actually saying, hey, of all the web pages out there, this one is the best. And so people are clicking on it. So I would say that when you have a 64%, which looks like what they got, of organic search, that's doing quite well. The second one is social. This means that in their case, it looks like 15.2% of all their traffic came from social media. I always look at this one because it's one way of me knowing how much social media my customers are actually doing. If they're not posting anything on Facebook with links back to their website, then that number is going to be very small. That rate's going to be very small. That piece of the pie is going to be very small. So if your social is not number two, it probably means you're not doing enough in social media.
We had
The
a
red one?
question.
Yes.
We had a question come up in the chat, and I don't want to get too far in it because it may have something to do with one of these pages. Josie asked, what is the goal values?
Oh yeah, down here, set up a goal. Yeah, let me get to that. I'm almost there because it is on this page. Now, the one after this is direct. Direct is red. Okay. Direct means that they clicked on a link on another website, like someone had someone else's website that's not a search engine like Google has a link to you and they clicked on it. Or it means that someone typed in your www. In other words, they went up to the top and typed in www.whatever.com, your company, and went straight there. That's a direct. Or they clicked on a link from another website to you. Referral. Referral is kind of it's kind of hard to quantify. I don't look at it too much, but basically there are websites out there that serve you up. In other words, they kind of give you as an option to go to, not search engines per se. It's more of a referral. The most common one you will see is an email referral. So for instance, if I put a link in my email saying go visit this website, that counts as a referral. If someone clicks on that link in the email I sent you, that's a referral. So it's kind of the best. That's the most common way. I don't want to get too deep into that one. It then breaks them down here and how all that works. But if we take a look, there is a thing called a goal. Almost every page will have a goals page in Google Analytics. A goals page is where you can set numbers that you want to achieve. And that way your reports will say, yeah, you did it, or no, you didn't. So for instance, organic search is at 64%. What if my goal was 70%? Then what I would go do down there is set up a goal with organic search 70%. And then if it ever hit that, there's a page I can go to and it would say, yeah, you met your goal. You know, or you might set a goal based on bounce rate. I want my bounce rate at 20% or less. So that's a way for you to set numbers that you're looking to beat. Okay. But they're customizable. You can do it on anything. So that's what a goal is. I hope that answers the question. Let's see. This is the path. This is how you can see pathing. Okay. So like, where did they start their session? Take a look over here. Don't look over here, but look over here. And I know it's hard to see, but there are some little gray kind of pathy shading going on here. And so for instance, it says the majority of people started on this page, probably the home page, and then went to this one called Digital Debrief. And then notice of the 3,936 sessions, 532 went here. And then of the 532, 344 went here. And then some got split out. You can see how they all start splitting out. This is showing the most popular paths. The most popular path of all is always at the top. And you're probably saying, well, Eric, how come the numbers keep getting smaller and smaller? Like we went from 3,936 to 532 and then 532 to 344. Even if you add up all the ones that went somewhere, there's a thing called a drop off. Okay. Because at some point people give up or they get interrupted and they have to leave, or they found their answer and they're happy and they leave. So that's called traffic drop off. So what you want are very long paths. And what you'll discover is that some paths are better than others. And you're going to be surprised when you look at the pathing on your website, because the majority of people will follow certain paths that they create their own. It's kind of like, you know, here in West Texas, we have lots of cattle. If you look at the pasture land, you'll see cattle trails. The cattle many times follow one after the other. And over time, they beat down the grass and create paths. Well, you can have predicted where those paths would be, but I can see the paths, just like cattle paths, this time on a website. And that basically tells me how the majority of people are going through my website. And it also tells me which pages, if I go all the way to the bottom, that they're not even going to. So this is another way of looking at popularity of pages. And it's called the pathing. Here is a breakdown, and you're probably wondering, oh my God, Eric, it's gender. How does Google know if it's a man or a woman? Well, believe it or not, they do. and let me put an asterisk on that. You see, Google users are some of the most common ones out there. In other words, people who have a free Gmail account. And what Google does, it knows that not everyone who goes to your website is a Google user. But if you do have a Gmail account, Google kind of knows if you're a man or a woman. And also, I'm going to scare you to death if I tell you some of this stuff. But understand, none of it's illegal. I usually tell the story about Facebook when I talk about this. Did you know that Facebook knows how much money you make? Well, I didn't tell Facebook my income. How does Facebook know how much I make? Facebook knows your income to within $5,000 a year. And the way they know that is they know the value of your house because that's public information. They know the part of town you live in. That's public information. They know the zip code you're in. They know the title that you gave yourself. They know the company that you're at because you told it. And so based on a whole bunch of numbers, Facebook in that case, can actually kind of figure out what your income level is. Google can do the same, but not as good as Facebook. But what Google can do is figure out gender. And so it's not going to be totally accurate, but it's usually pretty accurate. And I'll be honest, women beat men every time for whatever reason. Well, except for some sites we won't talk about right now, but women beat men just about on every platform. You'll also notice on this particular site that there's a world map and it shows where all the traffic is coming from by shade. It shows what the bounce rate is below for both men and for women. So my point is you can do some really deep dives on that information. Whew. Any questions on any of that? Let's see. Drew says, I would like to analyze bounce rate associated with a blast email, or perhaps all stats specific to a blast email. Would that data come from an email vendor? Yes. Like MailChimp or Constant Contact, both will actually have reports that show you how many people opened the email, but they didn't click on anything. Yeah, you can get that from the email provider. You will be able to see the other side of it, though, in Google Analytics. Okay. In other words, you'll see kind of where they went and when they got here, where they went after that. So you're going to be looking at two stats all at once. So yeah, look at Constant Contact, look at MailChimp, whichever one you're using, and it'll tell you how many people are opening up your emails but not clicking on a thing. Great question, Drew. Any other questions?
We do have another question that came through the chat, and let me get to that one. Okay, so Josie says, mine says 0 and I had to activate it for demographics.
What do you mean? What says 0?
Josie, do you want to type that in? I'm going to give you a minute. I've got to type in some more information for links because we do have a YouTube page. So while you're doing that, let me chat over.
While you're doing that, I'll answer a piece of it. Demographics has to do with age, gender. In other words, that last slide I showed you, that was some demographics that Google knew about. And like I said, a lot of it is an educated guess. But it's an educated guess. It's a good one, and it's probably fairly accurate because no one tells people whether they're male or female when they visit a website. But Google can kind of figure that out because it basically knows that from most of its users, and it looks at how many of those users are visiting your site, and then it simply extrapolates it out to the rest of the population. So, but I don't know what's marked as 0. I think I know what she's asking. Demographics is not turned on automatically. It's something you turn on. And so you just click enable, and from that point forward, Google will start tracking that for you. That's probably what that question was, especially if it says 0.
And she's saying, or rather, quote unquote, enable collection of demographics. So you have to go in and turn on that feature. Is that what you're?
Correct. It's not going
Okay.
to stop anyone. It's not going to stop anyone from visiting you. It's not going to create a pop-up asking every visitor, so how old are you? Male or female? Where do you work? It's not going to do that. It some people have some privacy concerns, and so they don't even want to collect that information. So I would just turn it on and go. More information you have, the better decision you can make.
And going back, we have just a couple minutes, so type your questions in, but going back to the one on the email blast, let's see. So you would put in, if he wants to analyze bounce rate associated with the blast email, so you would definitely put your web address into the email a couple of times throughout your email, right? To get
Oh my
that.
gosh, that's the whole point. That is the whole point of an email newsletter. Because if all you're doing is like giving someone an apple pie recipe, what's the point? The goal of an email newsletter is to get people back to your website. Keep in mind, your website is the hub of the wagon wheel, and all the spokes are the traffic coming in. Some spokes are Facebook, some spokes are email newsletter, some spokes are Google, but they're all funneling traffic back to the center, back to the website, the most important web property, the most important asset you have. Your goal is to get as many people back to your website. And the reason is because your website is where you convert them. Your website is where you convert an anonymous person to a lead, where you convert a window shopper to a buyer. Your goal is to get people back to that website. Like with my newsletters, they're usually about videos. Watch my video. And so I send them back to my website to watch the video, because while they're there, they may find other videos. But also the reason you want them to go back to your website is because you control everything there. You know, in social media and on Google, you can control everything else they're seeing on that screen. But when they go to your website, you control everything. They're not going to find a bad review of you because they're on your website. Your goal is to get people to your website as quick as possible. And then once they're on your website, convince them to convert. Okay, convince them to tell you who they are, or convince them to buy a product.
And I was frantically looking at the bounce rate on the website, and I think it's interesting because you kind of explained how to read the analytics. I want to remind everyone again that we will be sending a copy of the presentation to you. We also have Eric coming up again, so everything that he talks about kind of builds on it, on all the pieces come together. So if you have questions from this presentation, bring him to his next presentation. You can find the list of his webinars at nmsbdc.org. And that way, if you think of something that's not quite in one of his other presentations, go ahead and bring it to that one, the questions, and he'll pick them up then too.
Yeah, it's going to look, when you first go to statistics, it's going to look a little scary, but just focus on the little pieces. And I told you what the words meant, and just kind of look, and you can go deeper, go deeper. I'm a numbers person, so.
Absolutely. Okay, last call for questions. That's it. Eric, your last final wrap up before I tell everyone you guys have a great day. Eric.
Just remember, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. I hope you all have a great day.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.